What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 16 of Only for the Strong. Today's guest is an osteopath and steel mace instructor from Hamilton, Matt Selby. How are you, mate?
Yeah, really good, mate. Thank you.
Good. So I'm actually really excited to have a chat to you today for some selfish reasons. I was just, before we got on, I was talking about how, I have a bit of an injury, and also something I've seen in my clients is like problems, having a problem solve pain management and all those sort of things. But where I wanted to start with you is, can you explain in a little bit of detail what an osteopath is and what the difference is compared to a typical physiotherapist or chiropractor?
Yeah, for sure. We get asked this question quite a bit, actually. So, obviously, I'll start out by saying that physio and chiro have, everyone has their field, and everyone, people find that there's a practitioner type for them. So, yeah, physios are great, chiros are great. We just do stuff slightly differently. So, for us, we tend to be a little bit more holistic. Physios, from our experience, based on what our patients see, is they're a little bit more focused on like one area. So, say you're going for a shoulder complaint, they will treat the shoulder, and they tend to treat the shoulder with strengthening exercises and stretches predominantly, and a little bit less actual hands-on sort of manipulation of the tissue and releasing tight muscles and whatnot. So that's physios, and then chiros, a little bit of the same, but more of the manipulation side of things. So a little bit more aggressive in that sense, and they try to click stuff, and everything's really focused around trying to mobilize subluxations in the spine to alleviate, certain problems within the body. So for us, we focus on being a little bit more holistic. So we look at the body as a whole, see that whole person. And so if you've got a shoulder complaint, maybe that problem's actually coming from your neck or your mid back or your low back, or, you can kind of explore the whole body, and you can find various different issues all the way down. And it might be the root cause to your shoulder problem. So yeah, in a sense, we're just more holistic in that sense. So it allows us to have a wider scope, and generally for us, we find that we have good long lasting results because we end up finding the root causes to people's problems.
Mm. So, touching on that, what are some common trends you have noticed in your field of work as an osteo, whether it's to do with pain, injury causation, or bad habits being developed in certain movement patterns?
Yeah. So we do see a lot of issues with what we call upper cross and lower cross issues, and those tend to be caused by work postures generally. So a lot of sitting down. Sitting down causes you to kind of round through the shoulders, gets tight pecs, and aggravates the traps in your neck, and so yeah, you get headaches and shoulder pain and shoulder issues and chest pain, and then people come in also with low back pain too, and it's kind of the same issue. So you sit down for a long period of time, and you get tight hip flexors, which then kind of drags on your low back and your glutes and your hamstrings. So you just start to see all these kind of weird compensatory patterns that start to occur from desk postures. And then obviously we see a bunch of injury-based stuff too, but that's a little bit more nuanced because it's like they did one thing and then that thing that's caused an injury, and then sometimes you get like downstream compensations from that. So yeah, it's kind of two different things that we deal with, but generally
Mm.
it's kind of a lot of posture stuff, work-based movements. Yeah, generally the big ones for us.
Mm. Do you mind if we hash into the work posture a little bit? Because even
Yeah.
in the past, when I've worked like in a office type job, 9 to 5 sort
Mm.
of thing, and also straight off my top of my head right now, I have several clients who I do their training programming, and they never have any issues with the
Mm.
programming or the
Yeah.
actual training, but their injuries just like seem to flare up because of work and posture.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
are practical things people can do to problem solve struggling with posture at work?
Yeah, so we're big advocates on trying to incorporate more movement throughout the workday. So whether that's incorporating like a standing desk or taking regular breaks throughout the workday. In my opinion, I think you got to treat the body a little bit like water. If you got your stagnant water, that's the stuff that develops all the growth stuff, all the diseases, all the issues. That's in the still water. And if you've got a flowing stream and it's all aerated and everything's nice and healthy, that's generally how we want to see the body. So if you can try to move more throughout the day, that then will take away from any sort of aches and pains because you're keeping that blood flow through those muscles, and you're not really letting them stagnate. And yeah, we find that, when you do get into those rounded postures, the issue is that, as you kind of sit in that rounded shoulders, you actually start to stretch out those muscles in the back, and from that they just start to lose strength, they fatigue, then they get that ischemic pain, which is kind of that dull ache, and then from there, you know, that's when it starts to feed into other areas. So other areas that then have to compensate for that weakness. Well, it kind of seems like weakness, but it's actually just fatigue.
Mm.
And then yeah, from there you get a whole host of other issues. So yeah, I think movement, if you can, standing is great. Standing to seated throughout the day is also really good. So if you can kind of incorporate those sort of things, then you're generally on a better track to then being able to kind of add that strengthening component to it as well. You're just taking away all those aggravating factors.
Mm. Is the issue with people developing poor posture or just uh, pain from their work job super prevalent in everyone, like a lot of people you come across?
Yeah, yeah. It's very rare not to see people with kind of some sort of posture correction or dysfunction. I guess we just do it so a lot. You know, you go home and you'll sit on the couch and watch TV, and you'll just immediately slump into those kind of postures too. So it's kind of relearning good behaviors is another one of the things that we try to do for our patients. Yeah, the things you got to try and do is you got to start thinking actively about posture, and then from there, then it becomes subconscious. So the relearning of good postures and getting those postural muscles engaged again
Mm.
is definitely part of the rehab, and you probably see it with your clients too. So
Mm.
um, yeah, that's that's a lot of what we do is kind of retraining how to actually be in a good position throughout the day. And it's just trying to be more aware, to be honest. You can't be
Mm.
perfect all the time, but if you're able to be better most of the time, then things will be less likely to hurt and be really sore.
Mm. And then crossing over into a little bit more of an athletic and I guess resistance or training or cardiovascular conditioning
Mm.
sort of setting. What sort of common things you see in clients that come to you that are more in that space,
hmm
and what sort of problems do you find yourself having to try and solve?
there's a few issues around people trying to reintroduce strength training and testing particular joints and finding that sometimes it gets confused that a muscle's weak when actually it's just fatigued, and it's fatigued because it's compensating for all these other things, or it's the primary issue. So trying to hash out what the actual root cause of people's pain or dysfunction is, whether it is, you know, true dysfunction or if it is true weakness. That is part of the skill of trying to figure out where that person is in their rehab or recovery.
Mm.
Um, and you can kind of, yeah, you can kind of see it when people come in. You can test with various things, but yeah, it is the skill of trying to figure out where they are in that process, and not skipping to just the strengthening side of things and having to actually rehab, you know, a tight glute or a tight
Mm.
erector muscle, or there are common trends and common muscles that we treat a lot, and that's because of that kind of posture stuff that we get into. Um, but yeah, it's trying to identify where they are in that process of recovery. I think that's the big thing.
Because I feel it would be fair to say that over the last 5 years, strength training has got widely more popular. And
Yeah,
what happens is, I think that some of the myths around like women lifting is going to make you look manly, those things are getting dispelled, which is great.
yeah,
But then you've got all these people come to the gym and they're barbell squatting, barbell back squatting,
yeah.
flat bench pressing, and trying to conventional deadlift. But if you actually watch people perform those movements, and it's not really their fault, they just have been told that that's how they're going to get the most bang for buck,
hmm
they absolutely butcher them. And this is something like I was guilty of in my earlier years, but now I do understand those lifts a bit better and the biomechanics of them. It's so hard not like to, you just cringe because a good example I see with like a conventional dead is everyone goes to pull and before the bar even comes off the ground their hips shoot straight up, or for example when people are barbell back squatting they're like dropping their hips at the bottom and winking their pelvis at the top and all these sorts of things, and it's not even on the quad, which is what they're trying to grow. um, do you see those things cause particular injuries or issues for people? And that's sort of what I wanted to touch on earlier, is just about people developing bad habits and certain movements. Is there anything in particular that stands out to you that you have to try and solve on a regular basis?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, the classic is trying to figure out how to get the core engaged.
Mm.
And a lot of people think the core is just the abs. and it's really not. So it's obviously your abs, your obliques, and your erector spinae muscles in the back, including some of the glutes and the hip flexors as well. So yeah, it's the issues you do find is new lifters or people that are going to the gym for the first time. They're just kind of they've probably seen stuff on Instagram and stuff, and they just try to do what that looks like, and there's a lot of cueing that's involved with that. So yeah, I think you probably find, and it's hard when you go into the gym and you look at these as a personally you go in, you kind of can see all these people kind of doing things, and there's you kind of wish you could go up to them and go, hey, look, maybe just try this, or lift from a different position, or regress it back and try to do this. But you're right. All those things that you mentioned, they're all issues that people then come into us at the clinic with, low back pain or hamstring issues. Or to be honest, I do find though that I'd much rather people go in and try
Mm.
and do exercise, because I feel that exercise is a great screening tool. And once you add load to a dysfunctional limb or pattern, it's going to tell you if it's wrong or the body can't
Mm.
manage it. So I'd much rather they find that out early and we get onto it early, rather than them just staying in a desk job for 8 hours a day many years later and then slowly getting that low back pain. So I'd much rather they kind of go in and find, oh, actually that's hurting a little bit, maybe I should go get that checked out, and then we can kind of clear things up before it turns into something really serious. So yeah, hopefully that kind of answers your question
Mm.
on that
For,
side
sh-
of things.
for sure, just off the top of my head, leading on from that, I'd like to talk about abdominal training a little bit.
Hmm.
So when I started weight training, I was very overweight, and my thought process, what not knowing any better, was that abs are made in the kitchen. So I'm not going to train my abs until I can actually see them, because they're just going to be under the fat. What I've come to learn is that I think abdominal training is super underrated, super undervalued, as it's going to transfer to all your other lifts.
Hmm.
But also, I just think for strength, for injury prevention, and also I think it's probably the muscle group that has for the most part people choose the most ineffective exercise selection, and
Hmm.
they execute it the most poorly. For example, what I usually used to start with was crunches, leg raises,
Yeah.
not executing them very well, not getting any ab stimulus at all.
Yeah.
Now, as I've learned and I've sort of refined my exercise selection, I will do a lot of like variation of Pallof press, or more stability work on the core, and actually focus on activating my core. And it's just something I wish I did earlier. It's probably one of the biggest regrets in terms of training, and it's
Hmm.
something I hammer home to my clients, and I explain to them, I promise you, as tedious as this is, it's going to transfer positively to all your lifts, and
Yeah.
also just your I guess your biomechanics, and how you are executing certain movement patterns.
Hmm.
How do you go about, if someone comes to you, whether it's they've got poor posture at work, or they're struggling to execute movements in the gym, if you can straight away tell that they have got weak abdominals, they can't even hold a standard plank for 1 minute, how do you go about prescribing them certain movements or exercises to resolve that and strengthen their abdominals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So often breathing dysfunction and abdominal tension go hand in hand. So what I look at first is actually training them how to actually breathe into their diaphragm. Being able to breathe into your diaphragm will actually activate those abs as well. So start with that, and then also giving the people the cue that you actually should have a little bit of abdominal tension throughout the day anyway, just as core base posture movement. So there should be about 5 to 10% of kind of ab engagement throughout the day. You shouldn't kind of be walking around with your stomach kind of falling out. So that's a great way to kind of subtly start to get the core engaged without actually training the abs. And then from there, yeah, I'm a firm believer as well that like bracing and holding the core and then just doing training, like that should just be a core movement anyway. So, and then just time under tension with that core brace is also just as good as, say, doing, leg raises or crunches, or, things that really focus in on the abs, but you're really trying to engage the whole core. So you want the obliques engaged, you want the abs engaged, you want the back engaged. So the breathing in and actually breathing into with the diaphragm and expanding the stomach a little bit and using and clearing that rib cage will engage the core and will train you to be stronger for longer. Because also, if you can get a decent breath in with a decent amount of oxygen,
Mm.
your training is going to increase big time. Your strength is going to increase, your endurance is going to increase just purely because you're getting more oxygen in. So yeah, we regressed right back basically. So we breathing first, then just walking around with a little bit of abs engaged, kind of enough like you would just kind of blow a decent breath out. Like that's kind of the ab engagement that you kind of want as you're walking around. And then from there, yeah, we just get people to kind of thinking about doing that sort of engagement at the gym too. So taking a deep breath in and then breathing out, and then taking a deep breath in, but through like a closed mouth too. So that kind of really engages the core nicely too. So that diaphragmatic breath as well.
It's quite interesting because a lot of the things you're touching on are things that even just working with clients I've picked up on.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I started my business almost 3 years ago, I was working with a lot of combat athletes, and then and now a lot more general population type clients. But straight away I noticed that, and this sounds so stupid, but most people do not know how to breathe and do not know how to breathe efficiently when they are exercising.
Yeah,
and 100%. Honestly, it's a bit of a running joke, but I always cue my clients verbally, like breathe nice and calm and composed, because that's what happens, especially when you're trying to push clients and have a high work rate. When they start to panic and get that flight or fight response, the breathing is the first thing to go. And I notice that as soon as you like lose your breathing, it's all downhill from there. Like it's such a nightmare. 100%. And the other thing that I think is quite relevant is that, I'm not sure if you've seen that, but in bodybuilding at the top level over the last 5 or so years, there's been an issue around the bubble guts. And a lot of the speculation was that, they're taking too many drugs, they're eating too much food, they're not wearing a weight belt. But what they've started to, I guess, uncover is that a lot of it is actually abdominal control. And as you get bigger and you're eating more food and you just get more fatigued, it's hard to put on your shoes because you're so heavy. You just get lazy, and the whole day you're overeating. There's no abdominal control. You lie on the couch between meals and just let your stomach just distend.
Yeah.
And so if all you're doing is distending your stomach, you're never controlling it. You can't expect to go on stage come competition time and then be able to control it. And so even it seems like what they've started to find is doing things like vacuums is great. But one bodybuilder in particular who's in the top 10 in the world, I remember him making a comment that what he started doing is just during the day, he just tried not to relax his abdomen. He always tried to keep it tight. And over time, it's become second nature and just a permanent habit. And because of this, come competition time, he has so much more abdominal control, and distension's not an issue for him.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. And you'll find that the best kind of classic physique bodybuilder, Chris Bumstead, he's got a wicked vacuum pose too. So, and you will never see his gut kind of distend either. So, the ability to hit that, but then also throughout the day, you're right, not to let the gut just kind of fall out. There's a reason why you've got abs there, and we need to kind of use them. And it's hard when you're sitting 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, to actually breathe into your diaphragm, because there's only a certain amount of space in the abdomen. And if you're trying to breathe down with the muscles that's kind of drawing into the stomach, you've got all those organs sitting in there. There's just no space for the diaphragm to go. So you have to breathe up here because that's all you've got left. So that's why the standing desk stuff is really good too. It allows you kind of open up and actually have that space to breathe into where you're supposed to breathe, and take away from these little small breathing muscles in your neck, which are kind of only supposed to be accessory breathing muscles, really. Or when you're kind of really, hitting it hard, hitting that high heart rate, those are the extra bits that you kind of need to get the extra air in. So you shouldn't be using them all the time, and they get fatigued fast because they're small. They just don't have the same energy capacity as the diaphragm.
So the next thing I want to just touch on is what led you to becoming an osteopath. Was this path born from having an interest in training, and how's your training prescription changed through your experiences?
Yeah, so it was, and I think a lot of osteos kind of had the same story. It was an old injury that I had when I was much younger, and unfortunately physios and stuff didn't really fix it. And so mum ended up taking me to see an osteo that she used to go see all the time for her ailments. And and just over time that was the cure. So it was, but then down the track, that was kind of my first kind of instance of it. Down the track, when I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do, I actually started off doing a year of sports and exercise science at Auckland Uni. Loved the area in terms of the human body and the anatomy and the biomechanics, but I didn't really want to be in that kind of high performance PT industry.
Mm.
I wanted to be a little bit more hands on with my clients, and so kind of having a chat with mum, was like, should I go do physio? Should I do chiro? And she's like, why don't you see if there's an osteo degree in Auckland? And sure enough, there was one in West Auckland. Gave that a crack for a week, and obviously that was that. It was there was no turning back. We were hands on from day one, and learning how to move limbs and see what it felt like to kind of work tissues and stuff. And yeah, that was it. That was kind of the beginning of the end, I guess.
Mm.
And then in terms of how it's affected my sort of training, it's kind of made me a lot more aware of what I do while I'm training. So it's in the back of my mind, I'm like, is this moving as best it could? Is this efficient? Is this putting more stress on this ligament or this tendon? So it really has helped me, I guess, optimize in a way my training so that I'm less likely for injury. Really, that's all. And then I started to kind of think, if I'm going to preach this stuff and tell people that they should be kind of doing this, then I should probably do it myself, because a couple of years into my osteo career, I kind of wasn't doing much training. I was maybe twice a week,
Mm.
just doing enough to feel like I was working out. But yeah, it was once I came down to Hamilton and started working out with Steve, who you've had on this podcast,
Mm.
that really kind of kickstarted my love for training and loving the process of training.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of how it's helped my career too. So yeah, it's just made things try to be more efficient. Really, is really what it comes down to.
Mm. What training do you personally like to do yourself? Obviously, you do the steel mace instructing. Is it
Mm.
predominantly that, or?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of variety, to be honest.
Mm.
So a couple of days a week, I'll be training with Steve, and we'll be doing kettlebell stuff. We'll do mace work. We'll do body weight movements. So we'll be getting on the ground and doing stuff on the ground and being real functional, I guess, in that sense. And then maybe two or three more days of the week, I'll just do standard kind of accessory work, so that when I go and do those body movements, they're just easier. The body's more primed to move in that way.
Mm.
And then I've actually, in the last 6 months, 7 months, started some Olympic lifting too. So just getting the back strong, getting the legs strong, and being able to kind of lift those weights off the floor and then above your head is, I do believe that the posterior chain is the most important chain we
Mm.
have in the body. And if we can make that strong, posture is going to sort itself out, and you're going to really um, protect most of the vulnerable structures in the body. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach my week with training.
Mm. For sure. And then also what I really wanted to hash into is, I think pain is something that's super prevalent in pretty much all sectors of health and fitness and training and performance. How do you best problem solve pain?
Mm.
And what are some of the misconceptions you think there may be around pain treatment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, well, I'll tell you the main issue. What the main thing we do for our clients or patients is, often they come in with a pain in one particular area, and so what often happens is that area becomes very sensitized to pain, and so any movement using it or kind of sensation on it is heightened. And so really the first goal is to try desensitize that area and take away a lot of the noise that comes from that area and how it's relaying that to the brain. So we try and reset that muscle and kind of allow the connection between that muscle and the brain to kind of be reevaluated, so that it's not just staying on tension the whole time. Because sometimes it's like a minor injury, but the
Mm.
brain freaks out and it braces the whole area. And then you get all these wonderful kind of referred pains. So it's just kind of trying to calm that area down as much as we can, allow the brain and the muscle to kind of talk to each other again and reevaluate what's going on. And then from there, it's trying to make the whole area above and below it as efficient as possible. So you're trying to take the handbrake that is tightness off those areas so that they can all move as efficiently as possible. Um, yeah, I find that even those, people come in with one particular pain, that there are often issues above and below it that has probably been building to that problem for a while. And so we treat the area, and often what we find is we treat the area, and then all of a sudden there's pain elsewhere, but that's because that pain was still there. It's just this noise was so high that the brain could only kind of interpret
Mm,
that one pain at that time. So we dull that down, and then hamstrings start to get a little bit achy, the back starts to be a bit sore, and so that's just kind of showing you that actually there's other things feeding into this problem that we probably have to clear up too. So, and that's how we get kind of hopefully the complete resolution to a problem is, finding all the things that are creating that handbrake on that muscle and that whole posterior chain or anterior chain or whatever, holding that back from being as efficient as possible and
mm.
not getting as fatigued as fast. So I didn't remember the other half of your question, but
Yeah,
hopefully
you're
that
good. I wanted to ask, obviously, pain's a spectrum, right? And
absolutely.
I feel like there is this narrative that, the goal is to end up completely pain free.
Hmm.
However, I don't know, is that realistic? I feel like in training, you're obviously going to experience a little bit of pain, even, and for instance, like delayed onset muscle soreness.
Hmm.
What is your, I guess, how do you feel about just pain as a whole? Is it something? Is your goal to eradicate it completely, or just ensure this person can function in their day to day and train how they want to train?
Yeah, I think pain in general is great. I'd much rather see people in pain than with numbness or pins and needles because pain is kind of a warning system. It's telling you that there is a problem, but all the signals are working. Everything's kind of uh, talking to each other, but maybe it's just a little bit too much. So if you're starting to get numbness, and that's when nerves are kind of completely crushed, and there's some serious things going on. But so I'd much rather see people in pain than not. Um, in terms of good pain or bad pain, yeah, there's obviously training pain. That's good pain. I think you want to be stressing the muscle enough, but you shouldn't be sore the next day. I think if you're cripplingly sore the next day, you've trained too hard, and I
Mm,
think there's no way for you to kind of keep that sort of intensity up long term. And I think, like you've said in the past with other people on the podcast, it's the ability to be consistent and have a process that you can kind of repeat week in week out, as that's how you're going to see the big changes. So you do not want to be training to the point where you can't walk the next day. I think that's not a good way to go, and it's a very short term. Maybe big gains initially, but yeah, very short term. You're not going to be able to last that long. Um, but as I said earlier, I think if you are training and you are then painful, it's a great indication that maybe something's not quite right, and you need to get that kind of seen to. So I do think pain is good. And you're right though, the people do have a different pain tolerance, and pain is an experience. So it's all interpreted in the head, and everyone has a different pain tolerance based on previous experiences. So, it's if you haven't, broken a bone or done anything significant, then your pain tolerance might be lower, but you still have it's all relative basically. So it's still severe enough for you. If you're experiencing an 8 out of 10, it's your 8 out of 10, and it still matters
mm,
compared to someone who's had like bigger, more significant injuries. But yeah, I think pain is an interesting mechanic in the body and super interesting to learn about. But you kind of do need to be awake to experience it because it's got to be interpreted in the brain, and then the signals have got to be sent back. So um, yeah, in general, pain's good. I'd prefer pain than
mm,
not pain if people are kind of looking to kind of optimize things. Yeah.
mm. Is there anything off the top of your head that's kind of just super practical in terms of improving joint health? Obviously, you said earlier that just moving more frequently is great, but is
Mm.
there anything, whether it's anything in particular with nutrition or hydration or supplements or anything small and practical someone could apply to improve their joint health or their mobility at the joints and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think I'll touch on stretching for a little bit. Um, in my experience, I think stretching is a great maintenance tool. It's very seldom that you find stretching that improves things drastically when things are really tight. So, but it's a great way to not let things get worse. And so, stretching, I think, should be done sub pain. And so if you're stretching, you should be kind of getting to like maybe 3 or 4 in terms of intensity. Anything more than that, the brain and the body are just going to fight it, and you're probably not going to get any gains from it long term. And so it's kind of termed like micro stretching is kind of where I try to send my patients down, and that's just kind of that sub threshold sort of stretching protocol. And if you're stretching the muscles, then the joints have probably been stretched too, and that's a great way to keep things nice and mobile. I am a big fan of the Strom anti-inflammatory joint supplement. I think it's absolutely phenomenal, but taken when needed. It shouldn't be kind of long-term necessarily, but it's a great way to do an alternative to ibuprofen. And there's other products out there, but the amount of hydrocurc in that supplement is a great amount. And then the other things that is in it as well that kind of aid in, the remodeling of bone and the recovery of bone and all the other stuff in there too. So that, if you're kind of struggling with low grade inflammation, like joints are constantly achy, you just can't seem to get over the achy stuff, taking 20, 30 days, a tub's worth of that kind of might help, and then adding in the stretching and the other sort of mobilization work. You've talked to Steve about and I have the similar opinion. The Turkish get up and things that pack the joint. So you want packing and then traction of the joint to allow the synovial fluid and fluid within that area to kind of come in and come out, replace and nourish those joints as best you can. So that's packing and traction, and doing movements that do that will keep the joints as kind of healthy as possible. And probably trying to find movements that counteract maybe any of the day-to-day stuff that we get stuck in. So the desk posture, rounding the shoulders, trying to find things that kind of open up your shoulders and allow you to put your hand behind your head, and same with your hips as well. So yeah, just trying to undo maybe some of the day-to-day stuff is probably best. So I get people to just lie on the ground and try to open up their hips, and lie on a foam roller with it down your spine, and trying to open up the chest, and just trying to, open up the pecs, open up the hips, relieve that anterior chain so that the posterior chain isn't also fatigued too. So I don't know if those are practical, but I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, the Strom Support Max joint supplement you're talking about is probably the only thing that gives me any relief with my hip, because it's my two options are honestly that or painkillers, and I feel like painkillers are a really slippery slope, and
100%.
It's not resolving the problem at all. You're just masking it, and so you're going to have to deal with it at some point. And then in terms of the stretching, would it be fair, would you agree with the notion that, in my opinion, I feel like a lot of people just mindlessly static stretch, and even during their training, which I just think, I think that's actually, I would say, dangerous to just mindlessly statically stretch. Like you see it all the time, people roll in the gym, straight on the bench press, straight up to their working sets, and then all of a sudden they're stretching their pec and shoulder in between the sets, and I'm just like, that's why pec tears happen, Yeah,
100%. I think kind of dynamic stretching before a workout is probably not a bad way to go, but that's less about trying to improve range of motion and more about just trying to get your mind into that muscle and into that area, and trying to feel like you can kind of engage those muscles in the movement that you want to do for that day. So I think just stretching for the sake of stretching is obviously not great. And then I also try to recommend some of my patients that if they are going to stretch after a workout, maybe delay that a couple of hours. Obviously, there's going to be a recovery period of that muscle after a workout, and often when it's recovering, it starts to kind of, in a sense, kind of contract down and shorten just as it's recovering, and then it will obviously relax off. So you don't want to just stretch straight away and then for it to kind of go back to being tight anyway. So maybe delaying that stretch and wait until that evening, or and allowing the muscle to kind of cool down, calm down, and then adding the stretch to maybe improve range of motion, or kind of get that mobility back into that muscle after the workout. So in that sense, I think it's timing, and kind of with most things, just trying to be more mindful of what you're actually trying to achieve, rather than just going through the motions of just doing stretching because it's kind of seen as effective in that sense.
Yeah, because how I usually approach it, and like 99% of instances with clients or in my own training, is
Mm,
I will do some dynamic stretches at the very beginning of the workout, but I'm trying to make that applicable to the session.
yeah,
I'm not trying to necessarily increase my range of motion. And then I'll crack into some abdominal work and then my working exercises for whether it's
yeah,
press, lower body, or pull.
nice.
And then as soon as I'm done with the working sets of my actual training, um, to me, the priority is then recovery. And so I'm straight out of the gym, straight away getting food and straight away resting.
Hmm.
Because I think, again, I've seen this happen as a lot of people just mindlessly static stretch after they've just had a big lower body session or a big
Yeah,
press session.
yeah,
And I think it's just a recipe for disaster.
100%. Yeah, and this may be controversial in terms of people's opinion on this, but um, you see it in the gym all the time. People grab the foam roller, go put it in the stretching area, and crank straight onto the IT band. Um, it's not really a contractile tissue, and so it doesn't release like a muscle because it's more fascial than that.
Mm,
So, if you want to decrease tension in, and sorry, a little bit of a segue, but decrease tension in that tissue, really you should be addressing the muscles that kind of act on that tissue rather than
mm,
just trying to crank onto that IT band. So, the TFL, which is in that one just by the in the pocket sort of area of your pants and the glutes, those are the ones that you want to be foam rolling if you're going to be foam rolling anything to try to release that tension there. So, um, but yeah, you're right. It's redundant, kind of going and doing some stretching straight after a workout. I feel like you're wasting half an hour of your time,
mm,
which can be used a little bit later, which is probably more effective in that sense. So, yeah, I completely
mm.
agree.
So one thing I want to ask you, or just put to you for selfish reasons, is I've got like a really bad hip injury,
Mm,
but I am basically used to the pain of it. It's always painful. It always
yeah,
pulls. It always catches. My range of motion is so limited. I've kind of become accustomed to it, and I've tailored my training around that.
sure.
But earlier you were touching on sometimes there's an injury site, and then it could actually be something else causing that. And with my injury, what happens is my hip is completely knackered. I can't do any leg raises because my hip flexors will be in, like getting so much pain. But what I've
Mm,
found is my iliac joint round the and forgive me if I get anything wrong. Like
yeah,
I'm a
no,
trainer.
it's all
I'm
good. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, no, you're all
I
good.
try and learn the best I can. But my iliac joint round the back on my left side is actually the worst thing at all because whenever I cause any aggravation to my hip, my iliac joint round the back side gets so inflamed to
Yeah.
the point where I can't sleep, I can't walk, I cannot sit. Like
Hmm.
when I work on my computer, I sit on the floor,
Yeah.
usually on a trigger ball to get by. Am I right? And again, just my anatomy and physiology isn't the best. I didn't finish
Yeah.
my degree.
No,
That's
yeah,
all good.
yeah, yeah, you're all good.
Does the hip flexor goes and wraps through to the bottom of your spine? Is that correct?
So you're talking about like the psoas and iliacus muscles, so the
Yeah.
ones just kind of in the front that are you mate. Yeah. So they attach in your lumbar spine. One's in your lumbar spine, one's on the inside of your hip bone, and then they feed together and then attach into your femur.
Mm,
And so you can have two problems coming from one muscle. But you're right, the SIJ or your sacroiliac joint that you're talking about, I've found that there is almost like a one-to-one or a very direct relationship between hip mobility and that
mm,
joint. A lot of people say there's not a lot of movement at that joint, but people who have hip pain and people who have low back pain, that joint is often the main cause. And so what can happen is when you're trying to do sort of any hip mobility work or use your hip, if that joint's rock solid, it's going to limit the range in which that hip can actually move. And
mm,
so as you try to like maybe flare your legs open, you'll hit a barrier and there will just be no more movement left. And so then the body will then have to accommodate and it finds a way. The body is bloody amazing at compensating and finding a way to do the movement you want it to do.
mm,
Maybe not for the best.
mm,
um, but yeah, you're right. So that SIJ is probably your number one issue, to be
mm,
perfectly honest. And so then, if that joint's really stiff, then the glutes have to work harder to move that joint. Then the glutes fatigue, and so the back has to get engaged. And then you have
mm,
this this issue with the relationship between your back and your hip flexors, which often have to be one to one. So if your back's not engaged and your hip flexors have to stabilize and and you can kind of see it kind of start to unpack in that sense. So
Mm.
yeah,
I feel like it's real common for when someone's like, "Oh, I've got a sore lower back," and you just
yeah,
ask them, "How do your hips feel?" Tight
yep, yep,
every time.
yeah, 1 to 1, and and whether it's the hips driving the low back or the low back driving the hips, it's kind of doesn't really matter. That's just there's always an issue in that area, and
Mm.
it's super beneficial to kind of get those areas moving as best you can, and it's often psoas muscle, iliacus, erector spinae muscles, QL, glutes. In my first session with anybody that's got low back pain, I'll hit all those muscles and try to take away all of the tension and all those muscles are creating a handbrake in that area. And most of the time, I reckon people feel at least 50% better within that
Mm.
session just by relieving tension. We haven't even worked on patterning or trying to do anything else, but just taking away muscular tension in that area.
Mm.
Um, and people who have come to see me, I'm pretty synonymous for a particular type of stretch, which is super awkward, but it's very effective in mobilizing that SIJ joint. So,
Mm.
yeah, 100%, I agree. It is probably both the hip and the low back that's causing
Mm.
your pain.
So I've got some quick fire questions we're just going to roll through. The
Hmm.
first one is your last meal if you were on death row, and it's a main and a dessert.
Oh yeah, so it would have to be Nana's Yorkshire puddings with beef, and I found the other day we went to Cock and Bull, and it's they put chips there too. So
Mm.
throw that all in there with a bit of gravy, and yeah, I'm happy as.
Mm.
And then probably some sort of my dad's coffee
Mm.
caramel cake, probably for dessert.
Mean. One song to train to for the rest of your life.
Oh shoot, uh, big fan of Eminem's Venom.
Nice. Greatest athlete of all time across all sports.
Oh shoot, uh, across all sports. Probably Tiger. Tiger for
Mm.
me. Yeah. Yeah.
Favorite movie of all time.
Shit. Probably in terms of the grand scheme of things, probably Endgame.
Mm.
Marvel's Endgame. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Your biggest inspiration.
Oh, just the people around me, to be honest. I like to keep my network pretty small, and
Mm.
so the people I surround myself with are probably my biggest inspiration. It's probably a bit corny, but yeah,
Mm.
they drive me to be better.
Me. And then one piece of advice you would give your 10-year-old self.
Uh, buy more Tesla stock.
Nice. That would have been a good one. So before we wrap up, is there anyone or anything you'd like to plug or thank?
Yeah, obviously, in terms of the people I work with, obviously the people at Connect Osteo, they're great. Go check us out if you haven't seen us before. Steve, who you've had on here before, yeah, I think he's absolutely phenomenal and a great trainer and really good at what he does. So go and check his stuff out if you're kind of looking for functional training. And then obviously my family, Kirsty
Mm.
and Keenan, yeah. So
Nice. For anyone listening, you can follow Matt on Instagram at unconventional_osteo, and I'll chuck that in the description below. But mate, thank you so much for your time today,
no
and I'll
worries.
be following along closely with what you're doing, and we'll have to get you back on in the future because I feel like there's actually so many things I want to.
Yeah, we unpack a lot more stuff.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on, and you have a good one.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. Thanks.